Ladies and gentlemen, magandang gabi. Nandito tayo ngayon sa part 2, ikalawang kabanata ng hearing ni Digong Duterte. At bago natin antayin kasi 6:55 p.m. ay lalabas na kasunod na bagong kabanata, mag-umpisa na. Nag-break po sila ang International Criminal Court. At sa pag-break na abangan natin. Pero bago mag-umpisa uli ang kabanata, second part, ay nais kong gumawa ng summary kung ano nangyari sa part 1. Sa part 1 po, nangyari ay inanunsyo yung kung ano yung mga kaso na sinasampa laban kay Digong Duterte. Ito po yung tatlong count, no, na una ay mga pinatay sa Davao. Pangalawa, yung mga pinatay ng high value targets. Pangatlo, yung mga pinatay sa barangay clearance kuno, yung tinatag na tokhang. So, sa tatlo na to, pag babali, binigyan ng pa-chance na magsalita ang prosecution na si Deputy Prosecutor Binjaye at kanyang sinaraysay kung ano ang laman ng kanilang akusasyon. Ngayon, lahat po ng mga sinabi niya, kung totoo po lahat yun, guilty na po si Digong. But the problem is, pag inusisa mo, pinakinggan mo na maigi ang kanyang sinabi, lahat po yun ay parang, too good to be true. Parang totoo na hindi totoo. Imposible po patunayan ang kanyang lahat ng mga sinabi. Sa lahat ng sinabi niya po, pinapalabas niya na alam ni Digong ang nangyayari sa patayan. At alam ni Digong kung bago mangyari ang patayan, ay iniutos na kaagad sa mga pulis kung sino pang ibang mga ginagamit pagpapatay ng tao. As if may plano bawat isang pagpapatay. So hindi siya kagaya ng iniisip ko na may general na utos sa mga pulis, o sige, patay. At kung pagpapatay ang bawat police station, hindi na alam ni Duterte kung sino pinatay at kung paano pinatay, anong oras pinatay, at kung ilan ang pinatay. So, parang iyan ang katotohanan ng buhay. Pero ang pinapalabas ng prosecution ay alam ni Duterte ang lahat ng patayan mula Batanes hanggang Tabi-Tawi. So, paano natin malalaman yun? So, ngayon, ito naman, tumayo naman ito si Attorney Joel Butoyan na Filipino lawyer na accredited sa ICC, kasama niya dyan si Attorney Gabriel Andres. At tumayo siya, nagsasalita, hindi nawawala pagka-Pilipino niya. Hindi nawawala pagka-Marites niya. Kwento siya ng kwento at ang pinakamatinding masama ang ginawa niya, ni Attorney Joel Butoyan, ay ginawa niyang ebidensya yung lahat ng sinabi ni Remulla. Sino si Remulla para paniwalaan? Bakit mo sinasabi yun? Bendalo pa yun. Kita mo, ibig sabihin, the start of it, sa simula pa lamang, makikita mo na yung litrato kung ano ang kanilang kaso. So, kung ako po yung judge at hindi ako pilitin ko sarili ko na hindi magiging bias, titignan ko isa-isa yung akusasyon ni Prosecutor Minjaye ay lumalabas po na hanapan ko isa-isa na binanggit kung saan ang ebidensya at saan ang ebidensya. Tapos lumalabas po lahat ng binasihan, nakikita mo ito, napanood mo sa TV, napanood mo sa YouTube, napanood mo sa Facebook, napanood mo sa TikTok. Kaya ang mangyari nito, ang lahat-lahat ay magiging guilty si Duterte dahil sa YouTube, dahil sa Facebook, at dahil sa TikTok, dahil sa Instagram, at kung ano pa. O dahil sa X o Twitter. So ganun po ang nangyari. At wala silang specific na tao na may testigo na babanggit. Wala silang sinasite na dokumento kung saan ang galing ang mga kinikwento. At natanda, pinusinta pa yung litrato na magandang litrato na kung saan parang piyeta na kinakalaw ng misis ang mister na namatay. Ganon ang mga pinisinta nila. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to be sounding like a biased person. Pero iyan po ang nakita natin kanina. Walang binanggit na according to document number, ito po yung evidence, ganito yung litrato, according to the witness, ganito, wala po silang binabanggit ganun. So with that, I could only imagine paano nila maipapanalo ang kaso nila. Dito ba lang, kung ganito lang po, pinipredict ko na po sa confirmation charges, masisiro, matatalo sila. Madidismiss lang ang kaso. Tapos, dagdagan pa ni Attorney Joel Butoyan na walang ginawa kundi magsasalita ng magsasalita ng sinasabi na ang ebidensya niya yung lahat ng sinabi ni Remulla. Sabihin, paano patunayan yan? Yung sinabi ni Remulla eh. Ganun ang nangyari. Ay nako, with this kind of government that we have, ay paano natin mapapa-improve ang Pilipinas? At ang isa pa, sa kwento ni Minjaye, Deputy Prosecutor Minjaye, lumalabas sa mata ng mundo na napakasama ng Pilipinas sa panahon ni Duterte. Patayan dito, patayan doon, ganun ang lumalabas. Grabe. Parang gagawin mo, parang panahon ng gera ni Hitler, pinapatay dito, patay doon, patay. Ganun po ang litrato ng kanyang pagkakwento. So, wag na kayo magagalit sa ICC mga judge. Ang ICC prosecutor ang birahin natin. Kasi lahat ng kwento nila ay panay kwento. So ito inantay ko pa yung second portion ng hearing ay hindi pa nag-uon. Habang inantay natin mag-uon, mag-notify naman yon, ay magkikwento tayo. Okay. Sabi, ang nais ko lang muna kwan dito para may laman sa konteksto natin, ay hindi ko lang alam sino ang susunod sa magsasalita. Kasi dalawa pa lang ang nagsalita. Ang nagsalita, ang una si Attorney Minjaye, na Deputy Prosecutor. Kasunod, yung Pilipino naman attorney na si Attorney Joel Butoyan. So hanggang diyan lang pala kaya mo, Joel Butoyan? Akala ko magaling ka na abogado. Bakit ang sinasite mo ng ebidensya si Remulla? Sabihin, tanongin si Butoyan. Attorney Butoyan, ano ang ebidensya mo? Napapatunayan mo na si Duterte ay guilty. Sabi ni Remulla eh. Yan, hearsay na kagad. Sabi ni Remulla eh. Nako. Wag naman tayo wag man tayo sa makinig lang tayo. Ako naman pinakinggan ko po my fair analysis of their presentation of charges. Mahirap patunayan. May binabanggit sila, may rewards ko. So, iniisip ko, saan ang galing ang ebidensya na rewards? Baka galing kay Royina Garma. So, pag pinag-usapan natin rewards, at kung ako ang abogado ni Duterte, sasabihin ko, natural lamang yan ang mga police operatives bibigyan ng reward kung kada magagawa nila ay may nagawa sila. Halimbawa, may nag-report dito mga pulis, Sir, successful operation namin. May 5 adik, may 5 tulak kami, nakipaglabanan na napatay namin. Ako naman, pwede kong sasabihin na kung abogado ako ni Duterte, ay siyempre, i-reward mo, bigyan mo ng reward, pwede naman bigyan mo ng reward ang lahat ng mga kawani ng pamahalaan na gumagawa ng maganda. Hindi pa alam ni Duterte kung talagang ang pinatay ninyo ay totoong may nanlaban ba o wala. Hanggang doon pa lang si Duterte. Ganon ang depensa ko kung ako yung abogado ni Duterte. Pero kung kwentuhan natin lang ay yung pang-reward. Ano pang iba? Wala silang binabanggit iba. So, obviously naman, yung Davao killings ay nakabase kay SPO3 Arturo Las Cañas at saka si kay Edgar Bato-Bato. So, iyan ang kwento. Kaya nga lang, ang problema, ang hinahanap ko po yung binabanggit sana ni Binyay. Ano bang ebidensya? Meron siya para patunayan ni may kutsabahan sa gitna ni Duterte at saka ni Las Cañas. O di kaya sa gitna ni Duterte at saka ni Edgar Matubato. O di kaya sa gitna ni Duterte at magkasama si Las Cañas at saka si ah, si Matubato. Binabanggit ko po ito kasi po batas na talaga sa batas ebidensya na para mo maitatali ng gunman ang nag-utos, para magigilty ang nag-utos, hindi po sapat ang salita ng gunman. Sasabihin niya, siya nag-utos sa akin, hindi po pwede, sapat yan. Kailangan may hiwalay na ebidensya, patunayan muna na may koneksyon, may kasabwatan ang gunman at saka si Duterte. So far, sa binanggit ni Atty. Minjaye, ay wala po siyang binabanggit na ebidensya na magagamit nila para patunayan na may koneksyon o nexus sa gitna ni Duterte sa kabila at saka sa kabila naman si Las Cañas at saka si Matubato. So, yan po yung natin. So, ito na, nag-opening na sila. I-upload ko na yung pang second part. Pero habang hindi pa nagsimula, i-upload ko lang. Habang hindi pa nagsimula, ay atin pong ako po ay magkikwento pa rin patuloy. So, hindi ba, ang problema dito, nagpatuloy po ito, na may mga question pa. Anong pinaka-importante sa mga questions? May 3 questions eh. 2, natitira. Tatlong kwento. Yung unang question na hindi pa na-desisyonan ay nag-apila ang abogado ni Duterte na tanggalin po yung sila mga Filipino lawyers. Number 2 ay nag-apila sa pangalawang tingin ng kanyang health o kalusugan ay hindi pa na-desisyonan sa appeals chamber. Pareho sa appeals chamber yan. At ang pinakamatinding issue na jurisdiction ay hindi pa na-desisyonan, nandun pa rin ngayon sa appeals chamber. Yung jurisdiction yan, ang issue na yan. So, ngayon, kung mag-desisyon ng jurisdiction na yan, ay baliwala itong lahat ng nangyayari. Magiging moot and academic mga ito. So, ngayon, ano po ang meron dyan sa appeals chamber na jurisdiction? Itong jurisdiction na istorya, nagsimula ito October 2025 na sinampa ng mga abogado ni Duterte sa pre-trial chamber pa lamang na level na walang jurisdiction. Binasura ng pre-trial chamber ang kanilang hiling na ibasura. So nag-apila yung mga abogado ni Duterte doon sa taas, sa appeals chamber. At the same argument ang dinala nila, pinalakas lang nila na ang sabi nila, wala na pong jurisdiction ang ICC kay Duterte sapagkat hindi nakasapi ng ICC ang Pilipinas. Sa panahon nung sinampa ang kaso sa laban kay Duterte noong May 24, 2021. Kasi naging final ang membership ng Pilipinas sa ICC until March 16, 2019 lamang. So bago sa March 17, 2019 ay hindi na tayo kasapi. So ngayon, kung hindi na tayo kasapi, nasa prinsipyo, first principle in international law, sa kasuhan, hindi mo pwede kakasuhan ang isang bansa kung walang pahintulot ng bansang yun. Dito, walang pahintulot ang Pilipinas na magiging kasapi ng ICC. In other words, hindi mo pwedeng kasuhan ang Pilipinas at kung kakasuhan mo ang tao sa loob ng Pilipinas, ay hindi mo pwede kasuhan ang tao sa loob ng Pilipinas kasi naka-attach yan sa international law na kung saan ang partido ay ang bansa. So, habang inantay natin, patuloy ko lang. Ang argumento naman ng mga kalaban ng mga abogado ni Duterte ay meron pa ring jurisdiction ang ICC sapagkat noong February 18, 2018, nakasapi pa ang Pilipinas ng ICC ay nag-anunsyo na ang ICC Office of the Prosecutor sa katauhan ni Fatou Bensouda na kami ay magsasagawa na ng tinatawag na preliminary examination. Tapos ang tanong, yung preliminary examination ba na sinagawa nila ay sapat yan para magbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa ICC na magkaroon pa rin ng karapatan o kapangyarihan ng ICC na lilitisin at husgan si Duterte? Ang sagot ko dyan ay hindi po sapat. Pero sabi ng prosecutor, sapat na yun. Ang problema kasi sapat na daw kasi nabanggit sa Article 127 ng Rome Statute na sakasakaling umalis ang isang bansa sa loob ng panahon na hindi pa naging final ang pag-alis, basta mayroong isang bagay o anumang bagay na nakonsidera na ng korte ay kasama pa rin na magkaroon ng obligasyon ang korte. So ayan nata. Magsisimula na. Ayan.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.
Second part to, second part.
Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Binmar Verte. Paano mo sabihin inotaryo mong YouTube? Napakabubong talaga.
Judge Motog. Hello again. Counsel, you can continue because we were interrupted by the pause.
Magpapatuloy pa pala si Atty. Joel Butoyan. Ang kanyang ebidensya ay mga salita ni Rimulya.
Thank you, Your Honors. I was in the process of explaining the spread of impunity in the Philippines, and I will resume, Your Honor.
Bakit ba sinisisi
The plague of impunity has spread not only among Filipinos in the Philippines, but even among expatriate Filipinos in faraway lands like here in The Hague. When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives who avoid our own countrymen here in The Hague because chances are they are Duterte clones, they express their utmost concern that if we, their lawyers, feel threatened by mini Dutertes in a foreign country, we should imagine the far more intense fear they live with every day in their communities teeming with mini Dutertes. The victims also wish to convey that if the judges of this honorable chamber can be subjected to online harassment by Duterte clones, we should imagine the level of vulnerability the victims are exposed to in their poor villages. Your Honors, there is only one solution to stop the impunity propagated by Mr. Duterte from continuing to bring harm and suffering to the victims. And that is for this honorable chamber to confirm the charges so that witnesses can testify and evidence can be presented on the horrible crimes committed by Mr. Duterte.
Tinatakot pa korte.
The testimonies and evidence presented will inoculate these mini Dutertes from the virus of impunity that has infected them. When they will see and hear the utter cruelty, the sheer brutality, in other words, the brazen inhumanity of the crimes committed by Mr. Duterte, and the humanity of those whose lives were violently taken, it will rekindle the embers of humanity that still remain in their hearts.
Puro opinion.
Many of these mini Dutertes or Duterte clones are actually victims of massive doses of fake news widely circulated online. They need to be vaccinated with the truth, and the truth vaccine can only come from the testimonies of victims and evidence presented in a trial before this court. Truth is the antidote to the virus of impunity, Your Honors. The victims dread a future where charges are not confirmed in this case. It will mean that the virus of impunity will continue to spread and infect many more. Victims fear that Duterte clones will become an even bigger group that can elect another apostle of impunity as the Philippines' next leader. If that happens, an even more serious condition of impunity can take place in the Philippines, possibly worse than the orgy of violence that happened from 2011 to 2019, and this time, there will be no ICC to run to for assistance and help.
Opinion mo lang yan, Joel Butoyan.
The victims humbly beseech this honorable chamber to reaffirm the two crucial objectives of the ICC identified in the preamble of the Rome Statute. First, to prosecute and punish the most serious crimes that deeply shock the conscience of humanity. And second, to put an end to impunity and to contribute to the prevention of crimes of unimaginable atrocities. If this chamber confirms the charges, this court will achieve its first objective of prosecuting and, if convicted, punishing Mr. Duterte for the unspeakable crimes he is charged with. But achieving the first objective will not automatically make this court attain its second objective. Merely putting forward the evidence
Na-press na naman.
gathered and the theory of liability of the prosecution will not
Press na naman.
necessarily resolve second objective. This court should allow victims to testify, and the record of the proceedings
Press na naman. Press. Mataas.
must reflect the harrowing experiences of those impacted by
Press na naman.
against humanity.
Kanina.
It is the brutality.
Second part ito.
In other words, the utter inhumanity of the crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte.
Wala pa ko sahod sa...
So that the people who adore and idolize him, the people who have become disciples of impunity, will see for themselves the inhumanity of the suspect.
Panikwento.
For this to happen, the charges should all be confirmed.
Hindi ebidensya ang opinion.
The virus of impunity that has spread all over the Philippines is very grave and serious, Your Honors. Imagine a leader like Mr. Duterte, who proudly and publicly proclaimed his aspirations of following the footsteps of Adolf Hitler when he said,
Pati si
Quote,
Hitler na damay dyan.
Hitler massacred 3 million Jews.
6 million.
Now there are 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them. Unquote. And yet,
Paano naging
he
magaling
is worshipped by a huge number of Filipinos.
Walang paksa.
In so many countries, you will need to hide your adoration of Hitler. Mr. Duterte flaunted it, and his fanatics are unaffected by it.
Hitler.
Mr. Duterte has pronounced so many other horrible declarations meant to promote and encourage impunity, as it will be detailed tomorrow by my colleagues. And yet, he is idolized by a multitude of Filipinos. The defense will claim that he was merely bombastic and acerbic when he made these statements. But if he were merely being pompous and flippant, the people who were killed should be alive and laughing today at his supposed pranks and stunts.
Ang hirap sa ibuto yan.
Mr. Duterte did not only order the mass killing of people suspected of being drug personalities, Your Honors. He smeared them with accusations of being rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals. Mr. Duterte imposed an inflexible condemnation that if you are a drug personality, you are automatically a dangerous criminal who has engaged in unimaginable atrocities. The families of those killed did not only suffer the loss of a loved one, their families were even disgraced with being associated with a rapist, murderer, or dangerous criminal. Even after their loved ones were murdered, many families were subjected to deplorable injustices.
Nagkita mo ba?
Instead of gunshot wounds as cause of death in their death certificates, families were shocked to see pneumonia, heart attack, stroke, sepsis, and other false causes of death that were instead written down. Other families were charged substantial amounts. Some the impoverished families could not afford, just to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones from the funeral parlor who were suspected by the families of being in cahoots with the police officers.
Hindi pala si Duterte.
Some family members were even arrested and imprisoned by police officers on false charges and for the purpose of preventing them from complaining. In one particular incident, Your Honors,
Panikwin.
a young man and his common-law wife were sleeping in their shanty when men in civilian clothes knocked down the door to their house. The men dragged the wife out of the room. The husband was already surrendering, and he even started to strip naked to show he had no drugs or firearm on his body. He said in the Filipino language, "Sir, malinis po ako, maghuhubad ako, sir." Translation in English, "Sir, I am clean. I will strip naked, sir." Still without mercy, the men shot and killed him. After killing the husband, they arrested the wife and accused her with falsified and non-bailable charges. When the deceased mother and cousin went to the police station to find out what happened to the young man, because they were not in the scene of the crime when it happened, the two were also summarily arrested and charged with fabricated crimes. If the Honorable Chamber confirms the charges in this case, the witnesses and evidence will show that those who were smeared by Mr. Duterte before they were killed, they were inside their houses, sleeping peacefully with their families,
Alam pa ni Duterte sa
eating meals with their loved ones, playing with their children, or hugging their wives.
Walang ebidensya.
Others were merely walking along the street, having snacks at the roadside eatery, or plying the road, earning a poor man's living. They were all doing ordinary, peaceful, and plain human activities. Confirming the charges will restore the dignity of those who were killed and the honor of their families.
Ang problema, Benmar,
The prejudice suffered by the families of those killed did not begin and end with the killings of their loved ones.
hindi ebidensya
Each
YouTube.
killing set off a chain reaction that is continuously churning out a daily crucible of harm, damage, and loss. By masterminding the mass murder of mere suspects, Mr. Duterte has brought irreparable and endless harm to the families. An overwhelming majority of those killed were the sole breadwinners of poor families.
Storytelling.
These families were dependent on each day's wage for their daily sustenance. They were hand-to-mouth families. With the death of their breadwinners, the widowed spouses, a majority of whom are women, have had to take on the roles of two parents. On top of taking care of their children and maintaining the household, the widowed spouses now have the additional burden of being breadwinners for their families. Families have been driven to even far more serious destitution, Your Honors. The damage to the children is immeasurable. Their development and upbringing have been permanently compromised. They have been walking through life with one missing parental limb. Losing a parent under very dire economic conditions and under the most violent circumstances results in wounds that will never heal and that will absolutely render them handicapped for life. And then there's the indescribable anguish of parents who lost a child. No parent is supposed to outlive a child. Parents suffer a lifetime of grief when a child dies ahead of them, and the lifetime grief is unimaginably worse when a child dies under the most inhuman circumstances. The crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte did not only affect individuals but whole communities. Across the Philippines, numerous urban communities of the most impoverished villages were scarred by the violence and abuses wrought by a lawless anti-drug campaign that further worsened the misery and trauma of residents in marginalized communities.
Aba, may tubig pala eh.
In one illustrative instance, Your Honors, after the father of a family was killed inside his house by police officers, the entire neighborhood was so traumatized that for almost 3 months, and during the coldest months in the Philippines, they abandoned their houses at night and instead slept in the open public market. They did not feel secure inside their houses because there would be no witnesses if the police would just barge in and shoot at them. In the public market, the presence of many witnesses, they thought, will deter the police from shooting and killing them.
Ay, chismis.
It is also the victim's view, Your Honors, that the charges should be confirmed because the resulting presentation of witnesses and evidence
Ay.
during the trial will force police and other law enforcement officers to confront the brazen depravity of the killing of civilians that they either personally committed or allowed to be committed during the Duterte reign of terror.
Ah!
In one operation, the police summarily killed 3 men, 2 brothers and 1 friend, in the very early morning. The police declared that the 3 were nanlaban. They fought back.
Ah!
But the neighbors saw otherwise.
Asan ebidensya mo?
The whole neighborhood was so horrified at the macabre treatment of one of the fatalities. The bullet-ridden body of one of the 3 men was brought out from the 2nd floor window and dropped to the ground because the police could not bring the body out through the doorway. When the body hit the ground, the neighbors recoiled at hearing the body emit a cry. Aray. Translation in English, ouch. The man was still alive when his body was thrown to the ground, and the police just left him to bleed to death. The trial will hold a mirror to the police force and compel them to see how they were turned into executioners and assassins, and their organization transformed into a gigantic criminal organization or turned into a killing machine by Mr. Duterte. The Philippine National Police and the drug enforcement agencies have not made any initiative to purify the corrupted minds of their officers and personnel to our knowledge.
Ang mukha ni Paduano.
The trial in this case will be a tremendous teaching opportunity that can work to rectify the warped and depraved minds of Philippine security officers. The charges need to be confirmed, Your Honors, for the sake of the entire country, which has been desensitized or made numb by the massive incidents of impunity and the glorification of impunity promoted by Mr. Duterte. The whole Philippines needs to know the real story during those bloody years. There has been no opportunity for the entire country to really find out the whole truth of what happened. It has been hush-hush, tidbits of sporadic news, and always drowned out by trolls who mass produce and broadcast false, fake, and fabricated news. The victims also attach a very important historical significance to this case. If the chamber confirms the charges, the trial proceedings will produce a historical record of the most bloody period of post-war Philippine history, a duty that the Philippine justice system has refused to perform. The historical account on the mass murder of so many Filipinos during the Duterte regime needs to be accessible to our future generations, just like the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo trials, so that they will learn from it and not repeat the same mistake of selecting and glorifying leaders who preach and practice impunity. The prosecution has presented 78 instances of murder and attempted murder, clarifying that these incidents are only representatives of the extent of the crimes committed against thousands of civilians, Your Honors. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember that Mr. Duterte's bloody rule, both in Davao City and nationwide, resulted in as many as 30,000 victims of killings, more than 300,000 victims of arbitrary imprisonment, and unaccounted numbers of victims of torture, sexual assault, and other forms of crimes against humanity. For many families in the Philippines, the charges brought for confirmation in these proceedings represent only a fraction of the reality the victims have endured. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember the hundreds of thousands of victims are banking on vicarious justice from this case.
Hindi.
Finally, Your Honors,
Excuse me, Counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank
Ang problema ako yan.
Finally, Your Honors,
Sa dami-daming kwento.
the victims wish to humbly underline
Saan ko hagilapin ang ebidensya?
that what is ultimately at stake in these proceedings is the supreme of all forms of human rights, the right to life. The right to life is the very foundation of every civilized society. The ancestors of every nation fought against invaders, colonizers, despotic monarchs, and fascist leaders in order to secure the right to life of their families, their communities, and the future generations. The heroes of every country sacrificed their lives to defend the right to life of their people. We as citizens of modern societies are inheritors and beneficiaries of the sacrifices of our ancestors who bequeathed to us the right to life. We owe it to them to defend the supreme legacy for our generation and for the generations to come. For the past few years, Your Honors, we have seen an increasing number of nation leaders who time-traveled from the Dark Ages and now swagger in modern times as if they own people's lives. These brutal and cruel leaders must be held to account for their brazen disregard of humankind's right to life. Our ancestors fought in the battlefield to secure a right to life. In these modern times, the battleground for the fight to protect our right to life is within the four walls of this honorable court. May the God of life, the God of humanity, guide the honorable members of this chamber. Thank you, Your Honors.
Merci beaucoup, Maître.
Judge Motog, thank you very
Wala
much.
ka namang
Counsel
ebidensya,
Butoyan.
buto yan. Panay kwento.
Now over to the defense, Mr. Kaufman,
Sabi ni
please.
Ibn Marwerte, baka bukas daw. Kaya alam.
And I thank Mr. Butoyan for his intervention. But I feel that I ought to remind him that this is a court of law which decides matters on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of political demagoguery, and not on the basis of a desire to effect regime change despite the democratic will. And certainly not on the basis of statements made by Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remula, who professed that domestic justice will be denied, according to Mr. Butoyan, because of the lack of forensic reports and police reports. Now, I don't know which case Mr. Butoyan's metaphorical ship sailed into, but he clearly hasn't read the evidence. Whilst he was speaking, we examined the evidence, and out of that evidence, we found at least 35 reports substantiating 49 of the incidents which are mentioned in a document containing the charges. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. And what a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bongbong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape, or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise.
Maganda si
Rodrigo
Cruz, may
Duterte
pinipilitang
was
ebidensya agad.
unconstitutional and unceremoniously hauled off to The Hague. And when called upon to defend his master's actions and the said letter at a Senate committee hearing, the then Secretary for Justice, once again, Mr. Jesus Crispin Remula, persisted with the same dishonest theme. And I quote his words, "We did not assist the ICC. We continue with the very tenor of the letter that we did not assist the ICC and we did not have any contact with them." So he said, but with a document emanating from the prosecution team opposite and disclosed to us a mere week ago, not as information material to the preparation of our defense, but as exonerating evidence, we can now substantiate what we have suspected for a long time. The document comprises a transcript of a telephone call covertly recorded between 4 parties who cannot be mentioned in public, and one of these parties was boasting about how he was acting as the silent partner of President BBM, managing a scheme to funnel witnesses to this court while all the time ensuring that he could guarantee President BBM's plausible deniability. So it is indeed the defense case that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. set out to neutralize Rodrigo Duterte and his legacy. Yes, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, I used that legendary word, neutralize, so central and so essential to your case theory, because you know just as well as me that I'm using the term metaphorically. And now I turn to the substance of the charges, but before I do, a word or two about the geopolitical context. The scourge of illegal narcotics is not unique to the Philippines. As we all know, it afflicts Latin America, where I can name 3 countries where the death rate at the hands of vigilantes and law enforcement agents per capita population is higher than it ever was under Duterte. And as you should know, and you will hear from the prosecution, at any rate, the Philippines as a country is uniquely positioned to act as a transit hub for the trafficking of narcotics emanating from the cartels in China. And with or without Duterte, so we argue, the death rate would have kept on rising. Indeed, as we will prove with statistics and reports, the death rate flowing from narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left. Power. And where, I ask you, has the International Criminal Court been seen that Rodrigo did anything? The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was
Ay, nag-freeze. Nag-freeze. Nag-freeze sa kanilang site. Hindi sa akin. Ang ganda ng presidente. Magaling na abogado pero si Kaufman eh. Si Kaufman.
Pero sino yung nagsalita kanina sa prosecution? Pilipino.
Narinig ka. Ay, nagpiprease. Sige, antayin natin habang nagpiprease, magkikwento lang ako. Natutuwa po ako kasi magaling nasupla kagad. Unang pagsupla ni Kaufman kay Joel Butoyan, hindi po ito declamation. Ito po ay batas ng ebidensya, hindi po batas ng kwento ng politika. Tapos hindi po bakit mo dinadamay dito si Remulla? Hindi kasama dito si Remulla at hindi ebidensya mga salita ni Remulla. Yan siya nasabi, hindi po ito totoo ng 150 million kada buwan, kwento lang ni Trillanes yan. Ang totoo dyan, kung mamili ka, kung ikaw akusado sa ICC, ang ICC mismo nagbabayad bators ng attorney's fees na 2 million a month. Yan po ang batas ng ICC. Ang public attorneys nila 2 million a month ang sweldo. So yan po ang nagsisweldo kay Attorney Kaufman ay ang ICC. So tingnan natin bakit hindi pa lumalabas ang
drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was
ay namutol na naman, may hina internet sa dihig. Oh. Nag-ano ang internet. Sige, Debe, magkikwento lang ko habang umiikot-ikot. Subukan natin ulit i-repress.
drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was
Ayun. Paano ba yan? Parang naputol yung ano eh. O parang,
after the declaration of
I get it.
martial law. And it was on that significant day that Rodrigo Duterte was exposed to the tyranny of oppression and the abuse of power by the elite. And he took a decision. On that day, he chose to devote himself to a life of selfless public service. As a professor at the local police academy and as a public prosecutor in Davao, Rodrigo Duterte developed a lifelong passion, some would say an enduring obsession, for law and order, something for which he unapologetically enforced throughout his time as mayor of Davao City. Not as the prosecution say, through sowing murder and mayhem, but through winning the love, respect, and admiration
ito, balik na naman tayo. Naisahan ko ngayon ang mga kwan ni BBM. Ang mga hackers ni BBM. Ayun, pinasok na naman ako. Sandali lang, ipasok natin ulit yung speech ni Kaufman.
and they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie,
Ito, ah.
such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Anytime, or
Sabi ni
simply
Kaufman,
They Just Kill.
kinuha lang sa
The
pelikula.
photographers are fated and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred,
Mga reporter yun,
unchallengeable,
nanalo
and
sa
unshakable truth.
Nobel Prize.
And so the pressure builds up, And the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone,
Gandang
and
gabi.
bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history. In any event, we're not gathered here today to judge a man on the basis of his coarse attitude or his vulgar language. This court has convened a confirmation hearing to verify whether substantial grounds exist to believe that Rodrigo Duterte, the people's president, together with various so-called co-perpetrators, over the years of his governance, devised a criminal policy of wholesale and wanton murder. And since we are in a court of law, it is worth stressing, although I should not have to, cases are decided on the basis of evidence, not supposition, not rumor, not spicy gossip, and certainly not on the basis of political rhetoric and bluster. Because at the end of the day, were it not for those belligerent and controversial speeches, there would have been no impetus to bring the people's president to The Hague. And when the prosecution's evidence is examined, I would ask you to keep an open mind and to question not just whether that evidence has been selectively presented, but whether there exists evidence which the prosecution has failed to produce. And I say this with justifiable cause, particularly with respect to the Duterte rhetoric, as we will prove during the substantive part of our submissions, the notorious speeches on which the prosecution relies have been cherry-picked to suit its narrative while ignoring the many other speeches when the former president tempered his bombastic language by clear reference to the principle of lawful self-defense. We, the defense, have read as many of these speeches as we can find. In fact, in our poky little office on the top floor of the furthest building away in this complex, we have a counter which ticks and ticks. And whenever we come across a speech which contradicts the prosecution's murder theory by reference to self-defense, we give a cheer. And the counter goes up once more, and we celebrate one more nail in the coffin of the prosecution's case theory. As the statistics stand as of today, in contrast to the 20 speeches on which the prosecution relies to prove incitement to kill, we have found 35 more which say the complete opposite. Let me give you two examples from the very speeches that the deputy prosecutor himself cited today.
Ayan, ebidensya. Pinakita.
Let's refer first of all to the famous
Hindi ka
Pietas
gawin mo
speech,
speech, walang
which the
ebidensya.
deputy
Ito may
prosecutor
ebidensya,
referred
pinakita
to.
si Kopman.
So this is what the deputy prosecutor said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priests, including human rights advocates. They won't be able to prevent deaths, and so it goes on. But if we look further on in the very same speech, something which maybe the deputy prosecutor didn't do, this is what he had to say. To our police officers and other officials, do your job, and you will have the unwavering support of the office of the president. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be hell to pay.
Oh,
For
yan.
you will have become worse than criminality itself. Well, there you are. You have it straight in your face. PEXO, exonerating evidence within
Exonerating evidence.
what is claimed to be the prosecution
Evidence.
incriminating evidence. I won't take up my
Galing!
time by showing you the second speech, but there is one. If I have time at the end, I will show it to you. So if you add to that another 10 speeches out of the 20 speeches on which the prosecution rely in its document containing the charges, after all, we are in a court of law and we rely on evidence. And what is the evidence that's produced of these speeches? 20 of them. 10 of them, I submit, and we will show this in the substantive part of our submissions, contain exonerating evidence which support the defense case theory. In other words, if you add the 10 which we've identified in the prosecution's 20, to our total of 35, we come to 45 speeches versus 10, which we say support the use of force only in self-defense. That is 350% more speeches in favor of our defense
Patay, pero
and 354% more reasons not to confirm the charges. And you can bet your bottom dollar that at the end of today's proceedings, either the victim's self-styled legal assistant to ICC counsel or a prosecution intern will be tasked with scouring the web, looking for the means to prove Kaufman wrong. And I will declare it, and I'll declare it loudly and clearly, as if the prosecution didn't know it already. It's not enough to state that since the former president made those extremely inflammatory statements and deaths occurred, that he must, as a matter of course, be criminally responsible for those fatalities. At this stage of the proceedings,
abogado si Kaufman.
the prosecution needs to show substantial grounds to believe that the former president actually desired and foresaw that people would be killed as a result of his incendiary language. For the prosecution to assert that Rodrigo Duterte hoped for deaths to occur or was recklessly indifferent as to whether deaths would occur, which he was not, that's insufficient. So once more for the record, Rodrigo Duterte's language was aimed not at suspected drug pushers as the prosecution would have it, but directly at those poisoning society with their substances, and not, I stress, with lethal intent. His rhetoric was calculated to arouse fear and obedience, to instill fear in their hearts, and to inculcate a respect for the law in their minds. Nothing more, nothing less.
Nothing less.
That was his intent, and it was not criminal.
So,
And as
yun.
many of these
Tama.
drug pushers demanded to enter prison. I remember seeing the images on the television, lining up to surrender and to enter prison. Now, I challenge my colleagues opposite to prove otherwise, because as we all know, in a criminal process, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They brought this case and they need to prove it. Rodrigo Duterte need not convince the world of anything, and that is to his fortunate advantage given his current medical condition. He stands behind his legacy resolutely, and he maintains his innocence absolutely. Now, I turn to the general fairness and objectivity of the investigation, which, as we all know, is meant to be an impartial evidence-gathering exercise. As an ex-prosecutor myself, I'm used to investigating agencies, pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry, assimilating all testimonies, and digesting all documentation and forensic evidence, recommending who to target for prosecution, but not so with this prosecution. When we, the defense, study the course of the investigation in this case, one thing is plain as a pikestaff. The chief prosecutor of this court, Mr. Karim Khan, not only failed miserably to carry out his duties under the Rome Statute, requiring him to examine exonerating circumstances as well as incriminating, but he single-handedly contaminated it, so we alleged, by pursuing a one-track crusade with a view to a predetermined objective. Let me explain. Although the ICC officially authorized an investigation into the so-called Philippines situation in late 2021, it was deferred a few months later back to the Philippines for the official investigation to resume only in late 2023. But the real meat of the investigation into count 1, relating to the activities of that fictitious construct, the Davao Death Squad, had effectively started way before then, with the sole objective of nailing Rodrigo Duterte. Indeed, all the way back in 2018, during its so-called preliminary examination, the prosecution had an individual who will be referred to as P1, handed to them on a silver platter. This P1 had been interviewed at an earlier date by none other than Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, in his former capacity as a private lawyer, and the self-professed legal...
Yan. Please. Bumagsak ang transmission sa kwan galing dihig. So, ibig sabihin, may ginawa ng Pilipinas to kasi matindi ang banat ni Kaufman eh. Kita mo, ang galing ni Kaufman eh. Pakita natin Kaufman. Ano to, ginamitan ng tinatawag na yung DOTC, Transportation Communication natin. Yung DICT, sinisira yung presentasyon, no? Kita mo wala na yung connection doon sa galing sa diheg. No broadcast, fast transmission. Ay nako. Natin. Ulitin natin. Tangin na to. Ano ba ito nangyayari ito? Philippine government. Marcos, inutusan mo ang DICT na i-interfere ang pagtakbo ng komunikasyon galing diheg. Grabe. Sinisira nila. Paano ito ngayon? Hindi na matutuloy. Nako. Sinasadya ninyo parang nung nangyari nung isang hapon, isang gabi. Nagmamaniho ang anak ni Bongbong Marcos na si Vince. Nag-isa lang siya.
Rodrigo Duterte's role as the mobster-in-chief. The same...
Yan, pinutol na naman. Nagmamaniho ang bunsong anak ni BBM. Nasa tinted, nasa sakyan, SUV. Tapos, paparating siya, sa una niya, inubos ang 4 na lane sa Inlex, papuntang Maynila. Inubos ng convoy ni Gobernador Daniel Fernando. Ang ginawa nung anak ni BBM, kasi ang girlfriend niya naghihintay sa Makati, umirtik siya. Pag umirtik siya, wala siyang kasama, siya lang mag-isa. Hinahabol siya kayo ng mga gwardiya mga bodyguard ni Daniel Fernando. Nang nahabol, tinutukan 10 tao, tinutukan ng baril. Sinampal pa. Putang, kawawa naman ang anak ni BBM. Sinampal siya na mag-isa, walang laban. Tapos kinuhan lang ID, nakalagay pangalan, Vince, Araneta Marcos. Sino to? Kano naman si Marcos? Tatay. takbuhan ng mga bodyguard ni Daniel Fernando. Ay, nako. Habang magkwento lang muna ako habang nag-aantay yung naputol yung dahag natin na komunikasyon. Pinaputol ni Marcos, ang putang ina Marcos to. Pinaputol niya sa DICT. Anak ng waiting sila sa butahe. Sabotahe! Anak ng waiting. So ngayon, parang ang nangyari noon sa kay apo ni ang bunso ni Bongbong Marcos, nangyari dito nung araw, nung gobernador pa ng Bulacan ay
her preparation. And what was this information with which Karim Khan had helpfully provided her? A book on which the prosecution relies as evidence. A trashy, scurrilous item of pulp fiction entitled Duterte Harry. Your Honours, the picture on the front cover of that book says it all. It really does scream objectivity, doesn't it? I say that sarcastically, of course. Fortunately for us, the defence, the appeals chamber, has now disqualified Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan from this case. A welcome development as a matter of ethical propriety, but in our opinion, too late in the day to salvage the integrity of the investigation that he had supervised. An investigation in the course of which he concealed his former role as the victim's counsel, who had deemed our client a suspected murderer as far back as 2018 and right up to the very day before this pre-trial chamber issued its arrest warrant. Your Honours, over the next few days, we hope to convince you of the wholly insufficient nature of the evidence against Rodrigo Duterte. We will show you that the paltry number of speeches on which the prosecution rely do not manifest criminal intent. We will also convince you that as hard as they tried, the prosecution's investigators couldn't get even one of its criminal cooperating witnesses, whose reliability is next to zero, to admit that they heard the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, give an order to kill at any time relevant to the charges. or with respect to any of the incidents. And we hope that when you conclude your deliberations, Your Honours, that you will dismiss these grievously misplaced and politically motivated charges.
Yan, political
We will ask you
kaso.
to send Rodrigo Duterte back to his family, and we will ask you to give back to the Filipino people their Tatay Digong.
Oh.
Thank you, Your Honours.
Ha, galing! Palakpakan!
The presiding
Galing!
judge. Thank you very much,
Panalo na.
Mr. Hoffman.
Ngayon pa lang sinasabi ko
We
panalo na.
shall now suspend. This is the end of initial statements, and this is the end of this morning's hearings. We will take a 90-minute break and resume at
Okay,
2 in the afternoon. Thank you
Okay,
very
balik
much.
tayo mamaya. Very good, very good. Palakpakan, palakpakan. Yan ladies and gentlemen, nakita ninyo, napatunayan ni Koopman, una pa lang yun So ngayon, siguro sabi ni Trillanes, 150 million kada buwan daw bayad ni Duterte kay Koopman. Kahit totoo yan, pwede kasi ang galing bravo! Bravo, Atty. Koopman! Bravo! Napatunayan. Sabi nila kasi may theory, napansin ko yun. Naputol-putol kasi. Pinaputol talaga ni BBM itong, ay naku. Ang internet, nung nagsasalita si Koopman, naputol-putol pati ako pinutol. Sabi niya, ang sabi ko sa salita ko lang, sa sarili kong salita, inaakusahan niyo si Duterte na nag-uutos sa lahat ng mga pulis na patayin niyo sila, patayin dito, ako bahala sa inyo. Pero ipinakita ni Koopman yung salita na eksaktong salita ni Digong na kung saan may karugtong pala yun, tinanggal yung karugtong. Ano sabi sa karugtong? Pero oras na magkamali kayo, mga pulis kayo, patay kayo sa akin. Ano ba? Ibig sabihin, destroyed ng inyo theory na inuutusan ni Digong ang mga pulis na pumatay. Lalabas kayo ngayon na kahiya. Sabi pa ni Koopman, hindi ko makalimutan. Lahat po ito ay hango sa mga James Bond na pelikula. Tapos, mayroon pang ginawa si Atty. Karim Khan. Nakipag-sosyo pa dun sa mga politiko at nagpalabas ng karikature, Duterte, Hari. Palabasin nila si, Make My Day. Si Clint Eastwood. Naknang waiting naman to. Pang pelikula na pala lahat ng akusasyon ninyo. Ibig sabihin, ang pakay lang pala nito ng lahat ng kaso ay para matalo ang Duterte sa 2028. Pero, ang nangyayari po, nagiging blessing in disguise sa mga Duterte. Kasi lumalabas po sa ngayon ay wala. Lumalabas parang parang tinatag na utak na walang laman ang kanilang kaso. Kita mo nagsasalita kanina yung kapareho kong kalbo na deputy prosecutor, si Minjaye. Kwento ng kwento. Kung paniwalaan mo lahat ng kwento niya, guilty na si Duterte. Pero ni isang ebidensya, wala siyang binanggit para mapatunayan ang bawat salita niya. Ito naman si Butoyan, walang ginawa, kundi ang kanyang ebidensya ay walang iba, si Rimulya. Lahat ng binanggit ni Rimulya, si Bendalo. Anong klase ka, Butoyan, na abogado ka? You are a man of law, not a man of chismis. Dinala mo mga chismis sa International Criminal Court. Binabanggit mo doon, panay chismis. Nakakahiya ka. Pinahiya mo ang University of the Philippines College of Law sa ginagawa mo yan. Sinabihan tuloy siya nang magsalita na si Koopman. I wish to remind you that this is a court. This is not a platform for political statements, but this is a platform for all evidence. Grabe. Akalain mo gawin mong ebidensya yung salita ni Rimulya? Ano ba yung meron kay Rimulya? Binayaran ka ba ni Rimulya? Ha? Buto yan? Grabe ka. Ay, naku talaga. Iyan pa ang problema sa atin. Binayaran ni si Butuyan ni Rimulya para pasikatin si Rimulya. Biro mo, banggitin mo, saka makakita. Patayan sa mga Batangas, Pampanga, sa Ilocos, sa Bicol, sa Sulu, sa Hulo, sa Basilan, sa Zamboanga, sa Surigao, sa Cebu, Iloilo, Negros, ang patayan doon. Tapos ang sabihin mo, paano patunayan na may nangyari patay doon? Si Rimulya po. Anong klaseng abogado ka galing UP? Ha? Attorney Butoyan, isauli mo lisensya mo pag-abogado. You are talking not as a lawyer but as a politician. Tatakbo ka ba sa sunod? Sa inyong lugar? Tatakbo ka ba, congressman? Huwag nyo na iboto si Butoyan. Boto mo! Boto mo, gamay! Ano ka, pisot? Ano klase ito? Biro lang yun, pero ito na Binmar Huerte. Ito na ngayon. Nakikita mong pinagmamayabang ng mga attorney, konti lang palang alam, konti lang ebidensya. Panay kwento. Saan ang galing? Sabi ni Atty. Kapan, nanggaling lahat ng script sa James Bond story. Ay, nako. Gusto na palabasin, base sa salita ni Butuyan at saka ni Minjaye, na lahat ng mga galaw, hindi pa napatay ang mga sa presinto, sa payatas, hindi pa napatay. Alam na ni Duterte na papatayin. Pwede ba yun? At anong ebidensya ninyo na sinabi, pati yung patayan sa loob ng bahay, parang pinapalabas ninyo na alam ni Duterte? Paano malalaman? May alam ako. Actually, pamangkin pa nga ng client ko. Pinatay sa loob ng bahay nila. Pero ang pumatay po, hindi naka-uniforme. Maaring pulis yun. Pinatay siya. Ang kanyang misis, na mismong pamangkin ng client ko, pinatay din. Nangyari po ito sa Batangas. Hindi ko nabagitin kung saan sa Batangas. Pinatay sila sa harap ng anak nila. Karumal-dumal. Ang tanong, si Duterte ba may kasalanan yan? Sinabi naman ni Duterte, kayo mga pulis, sige, nagtrabaho kayo. Hala, kung ano ba ang gagawin nyo, gawin ninyo ang tama. Basta mawala na itong mga tinatawag na mga drugs problem. Pero pag kayo magkasala, you will go to hell. O, yan, sinabi ni Duterte. Ngayon, sinabi rin ni Atty. Kaufman, if there is any, why Duterte is speaking in a manner that brings fear to all men in the Philippines is only to do the rising rhetoric in order to instill fear, not to involve or engage in drugs. Hanggang mali ba yun? Kung gano'n ang style niya, mag-level up siya ng pangtakot sa mga mamamayan na huwag kayo mag-drugs. Wala naman siya pinatay. Very, very, very clear. All these accusations are only made out of James Bond movies. Tapos, tinira pa ni Atty. Kaufman, si Maria Risa. Ginagamit lang itong kwentong ito para manalo sa Nobel Prize. Kakargahan ng kwento. Yan po ang nangyayari. So, when this begins, unfortunately, kinatatakutan ni Duterte. But on the other hand, he did not realize that this will be the start of his glory in this case. Kasi ang mangyari po nito, pag matapos ang kaso nito, lalong mananalo ang Duterte sa 2028. Wala na kayo makukuha. Tapos, sinabayan pa ng impeachment laban kay Sara. Anong ibig sabihin? Coordinated? Coordinated. Kanina, inendorso ang impeachment laban kay Sara habang nagtatrial si Digong sa ICC. Ano ibig sabihin nun? This is the biggest evidence of syndicated cases against the Dutertes. Nothing more, nothing less. Di ba? Ay, magbiro muna ako. May nagsabi to, H.C. Hill Santiago, ay may kalbo. Okay lang po yung kalbo kasi sa akin po, nakatago lang. Ganun naman talaga kami na magagaling, tinatago lang ang galing. Kaya kami kakalbo, tinatago lang ang galing. O tinatago rin ang buhok. So ngayon, ang problema ko, babalik tayo sa martial law. Mas marami ng di hamak, halos 100,000 ang pinatay ng martial law. Sinong arkitekto niyan? Si Enrile. Common plan din, si Marcos. Ang ginagawa nila ay para makupo nilang buong Pilipinas at gagawa sila ng kaharian sa buong Pilipinas. Ang mangyari dyan, kulang na lang. Kaya di ba nagpalabas lang Maharlika para magiging lakan? At lakandula o lakambini. Gusto nila, ganun sila sa panahon na yun. Kaya naisilang sa isipan ni Marcos yung Maharlika. Gayon, dinala pa rin ng kanyang anak, Maharlika Investment Fund. Ako, ubos ang pera ng bangko natin. So, ibig sabihin, i-shortcut ko na muna. This early, I am too much confident na bababuyin sila sa talo nila. Mapapatunayan na ang lahat ng mga akusasyon nila sa mga Duterte ay galing lamang sa James Bond story. At hango ito sa mga pelikula ni Clint Eastwood na Dirty Harry. Tapos na paggawa si Attorney Karim Khan ng magazine, ang title Duterte Harry. Ibig sabihin, lahat mo ito ay drama at ginamit ito ni Maria Risa ng Rappler para manalo siya sa Nobel Prize. Alam mo magkano premium niya? Dapat $10 million. Hinati nila kasi may isang taga-Russia na nanalo, naghati sa tag $5 billion. Biro mo, pinagkitaan mo, Maria Risa, si Duterte? Wala kayong kung sabi ng mga Cebuano, waka kuya pe. Naunsa man kamo. Asa kamo may barog karon? Sa Tagalog pa, naano kayo? Saan kayo tatayo ngayon? Sabi nakakahiya, di ba? So, mamaya babalik tayo. Dito na muna. Alauna, isang oras na mahigit. So, anyway, hindi na muna ako magtatawag sa mga mga natin. I-out ko na muna. Salamat po. Babalik po kayo mamaya. I-like nyo lang muna po laya. Pakiusap ko lang. Paki-like nyo. At kung may awa kayo na para sa katotohanan na magawa natin, ay tulungan nyo na lang ako sa aking Gcash. Kaysa magmamalimos ako sa kalsada. Diba? Kaysa magtutugtog ako ng gitara sa Quiapo. Tapos kakanta ko, Highway Run into the midnight sun. Okay, ganoon na lang ha. Balik tayo. Ilagay ko lang ito ang Gcash ko. Maganda. Super nangyari ngayon. Mamaya, anbagan natin. May rason naman pala talaga bakit mahal ang singil niya. Mag-aaral ka na muna sa College of Law, Trillanes. Enroll ka sa UP College of Law para lahat ng mga bubo, ng mga abogado, ay pasensya na ka mga taga-UP ha. Pasensya na kasi lumalabas pa mga produkto niyo puro bubo eh. Ay nako. Jesus Falsis. Attorney Jesus Falsis, tawag ko siya, Falsos Idonos, Falsos Inamnimos. Isa pa si Dino De Leon. Isa pa si Attorney, ano ba yun? Yung spokesman ni ano? Ni Ping, ni Leni Robredo. Nagmami. Ay nako, ito pa siyang, yung Bushman, graduate ng UP College of Law, kaklase ni Barbecue rin. Nako, ano mangyari? Attorney Jing Paras, ano ba yung mga kaklase mo sa UP? Pero kakampi ko naman si Attorney Jing Paras. Ayan kung maawa kayo sa pobreng alindahaw. Ano yung pobreng alindahaw? Kanta ng mga buholano yun. Ako'y pobreng alindahaw. Sa huy-huy, gianod-anod. Yan At tapos, paki-like para ma-notify kayo pagbalik ko mamaya. Tapos, kung mag-member kayo sa aking channel, 75 pesos lang naman kada buwan niyo, makatulong na kayo sa akin para ma-improve natin ang ating makahire ako ng mga tao na tutulong sa akin. Kasi, to tell you the truth, alam ito ng kaharap ko ngayon, one-man army ako. Lahat ako gumagawa, technology. Kaya pati yung pag-atake, wala akong depensa kung inatake ako ng Malacanang. So, iyon lang hinihiling ko. Pagkatapos, padala niyo naman ako super sticker. I-like nyo ang aking Instagram, like nyo ang aking, search nyo lang Facebook, sa Twitter, at saka may isa pa kong account sa YouTube. Paki-like nyo na lang yung ang account na Toto Kausing din. Okay? Kasi pag tinanggal tayo ng YouTube, meron pa tayo isang natitira. Maraming salamat po. Babalik tayo mamaya kunti.